Hi, Alex Polyak here. On December 25, 2024, several GTA design documents were leaked into the public domain, revealing details of the early concepts of our favorite games. This leak was accompanied by a story about a person in the gaming community who was secretly buying documents from former Rockstar employees and reselling them at a very inflated price to various GTA fans. This person was parasitizing on the internal materials of the developers and was extremely greedy, so there was someone who chose to publish some documents on the internet so that no one else could make money on them. This is roughly what the story looks like, according to the author of the leak. I have familiarized myself with these design documents, and I can say that they look very convincing. First of all, I want to talk to you about the most informative and amazing of them, which reveals the concept of the GTA Online project, which Rockstar thought about back in 2001 during the development of GTA 3. And it was on the basis of this game that they planned to make an incredible multiplayer. By the way, the former technical director of Rockstar North, Abba Vermeer, confirmed that at that time they were indeed working on the online mode of GTA 3. Abby does not remember this document, but he said that people from the Barking Dog team, which is listed as the developer of the leaked GTA Online document, came to Rockstar North to discuss the multiplayer. The Barking Dog studio later transformed into Rockstar Vancouver and worked on such projects as Bully and Max Payne 3. But let's get back to the design document. This is a really interesting artifact from which I tried to collect all the most noteworthy, adding my comments to this. So let's finally get acquainted with what GTA Online could theoretically look like in the early 2000s, according to one of the early concepts. First, pay attention to the logo, which can easily evoke an association with GTA Online, released in 2013. But let's look even deeper and see what the logo of this project was in the beta version. It seems that the 2001 project had a big influence on this, and of course, we should pay attention to the name itself, GTA Online, which Rockstar used later. The authors of the document write that their main idea is to transfer all the action of the GTA world to an online format, where players will have to achieve fame and power. The basis of the system is criminal groups that control different areas of the city. We will talk about gangs in more detail soon. The document refers to the experience of the 2000 game Cataclysm, in which users change the virtual world in real time. This game was released by the same studio Barking Dog, which wrote the design document for GTA Online in 2001. The possibility of creating amateur servers that players would launch on their own PCs is mentioned. The description of the registration process says that in addition to their name and address, the user must choose a payment method, also specifying a term, for example, a month, 6 months, and so on. It seems that the original idea was to give players access to multiplayer only with a permanent payment. On one of the initial screens, before entering the server itself, the player should have seen a message with all the relevant information. I think this is approximately what was later implemented in the initial menu in Grand Theft Auto 5 and Online. It also says about the possibility of using the same custom character on any server the player connects to. The designers cited Counter-Strike as an example. At the same time, another system is mentioned, in which the character will be tied only to a specific server. The idea was for the player to have multiple accounts, and in each of them he could have up to 4 characters on each server. The player could choose one of the skins offered by the game and upgrade the skills that he liked best, as well as customize the character's appearance with clothing and accessories. The choice of skins and clothing was supposed to be quite large. Small interiors were envisaged, which were eventually implemented only in subsequent GTA games. Crimes could be committed in them. Probably, it would look like a robbery in Grand Theft Auto Vice City. And also there you could store your things or victims, which is more like a personal shelter. And yes, you heard right, the designers really described the ability to move bodies, which is also reported on other pages of the document. At this point, I really want to remember Red Dead Redemption 2. According to the idea, users could activate random missions. For example, the player launches a mission for one person to kidnap the daughter of the faction leader, and then he launches a mission for the entire faction to protect that daughter. It reminded me a bit of GTA 4 multiplayer, where players could launch different missions that were completed with some plot. The game was supposed to feature the most famous criminal groups such as the Mafia, Yakuza, Bikers, and others. Players could become members of such groups to achieve various goals, which, according to the designers, would make the game world dynamic and filled with criminal politics, various alliances, betrayal, and also street warfare. It was implied that each player would have a certain reputation with a particular group. Reputation could be positive or negative, which is reminiscent of the system from GTA 2. Each faction had its own specifics that affected the members of the group. For example, it was easier for a mafia representative to trade in stolen cars, but he was more often subject to police attention. A member of the Triad had easier access to exotic weapons, but had his own risks. The police are a separate faction in which players had to patrol the city, trying to arrest other players. Cops had free access to weapons and vehicles, but this was balanced by strict rules of conduct, while criminals were not limited by the rules. For failure to follow the rules, a police officer could be demoted or fired, which would force him to side with crime. The developers expected that such aspects would provide an opportunity for a variety of developments, up to undercover police work or even corruption among law enforcement officers. Players could report other players' criminal activities to cops, eliminating rivals and winning over police officers. If a police officer himself committed a crime and was caught, he would be suspended from work for some time. This restriction was considered by the designers as an analog of prison. Each faction had a rank system that worked both to promote and demote a player. Moreover, each rank was supposed to have a limit on the number of participants. This means that if someone received a higher rank, then one of the representatives of this rank could be demoted in the faction hierarchy. This would create real competition, pushing players to be more active, intrigued, and betrayed for the sake of becoming more influential in the group. The higher the rank, the more powerful weapons the player could afford. When starting a mission, the game had to take into account the player's rank, and then it created conditions for completing it. For beginners, the missions were simple, and for experienced players, there were more serious tasks that might require a whole team of developed characters. Moreover, a player with a high rank could provide his assistants with the necessary equipment. If the player preferred to complete a mission on his own, the game would provide such an opportunity. Surprisingly, even in the later released GTA Online, the developers did not come to this concept right away, so the player could not complete the first major robberies without partners. The territories of enemy gangs were supposed to be a dangerous zone. During the mission, the game will not send some newbie to such places, but it can send a player with high experience there. Thematic meeting places for each faction were conceived. For example, the Mafia could meet in the backyard of their restaurant, and the Yakuza would have an office space. In such places, each faction could plan their affairs and so on. There was even a board with tasks, which immediately gives us a reason to remember something similar in the real GTA Online. There is also some basic information about specific criminal groups. For example, the Italian Mafia would have the largest and most well-protected territory at the start of the game. This is a really powerful organization, which, among other things, would have influence on the police, so the Mafia would be released faster in case of arrest. However, the disadvantage of the Mafia is that it has many enemies and it is difficult to earn a higher rank in it. The Yakuza has a small territory, and the player will also slowly move up the career ladder. But this group has access to high-tech items, and it does not have sworn enemies in the person of other factions. The Dogheart faction has a very secure territory and easy access to weapons, but they have no connections with the police, which means that its members will often fall into the police's sights and will receive a longer arrest period. The bikers are spread throughout the city, so the player always has the opportunity to find a place to hide, but they do not have a large and well-protected territory. And another disadvantage is the high level of recognition among the police. The police certainly have easy access to ammunition, as well as their own fleet of vehicles, and they can always count on reinforcements. But they are more or less hated by all the other factions. The faction territories were supposed to work in such a way that the group usually had its own key area that cannot be lost, and neighboring areas of the city can be annexed to it by completing various missions there. Each faction has its own headquarters, where players can meet, save, respawn, receive missions and orders from the leader. And although some regular tasks could be found in other places on the map, really big and serious missions were issued only at the headquarters. And this again reminded me a little of the late GTA Online project with all its updates. The designers described that players could gather at tables in the headquarters of their factions to recruit a team for a mission or discuss the details of a future task. The user could also change the faction, but only if his reputation in his own group was completely reduced, and of course, provided that he did not have a negative reputation in the new faction. The game conceived a system of a second reputation, less formal than the first. It did not affect the character's capabilities in the game world, but it could affect relationships with people. For example, if one player robbed another, the victim could go to a certain snitch board and enter the name of his offender there. It was also possible to increase the player's reputation. Other users could rely on such a rating to decide whether to deal with unreliable players or not. The authors of the document clarify that the gaming industry already has enough games where you can just run around with a gun and shoot at everything, and GTA Online should give players missions of varying difficulty that need to be completed based on your character's abilities. The missions were planned to combine action, role-playing, and a skill system. Instead of a level system, it was planned to give the character more money, better working conditions, more things, and authority as he developed. The growth of skills as any actions were performed gave players more opportunities and more style in their execution. For example, an experienced hacker could cope with the digital protection of an armored car, but a beginner would not be able to do this. I wonder if you also remembered the digital protection systems in Chinatown Wars, which the player could also hack. But this appeared 8 years after this design document was written. An interesting balance system was conceived where, as the character developed, the items available to him would increase in price, and this would create a conditional equality between experienced players and beginners. Also, having bought a particularly cool car, the player risked losing it forever in another shootout. The designers described such moments as a unique system of ups and downs, the likes of which they had not seen in the gaming industry at that time. It was also expected that the game would have establishments such as banks, shops, and other places, which could be robbed. And such places as night bars and clubs were to be used as a constantly accessible location in which players could leave the server. Therefore, there was no opportunity to commit a raid there. When creating a character, the user received 60 base points, which could be distributed between in favor of certain character skills and increase those parameters that the player himself considered necessary. When choosing a faction, the character also received some features. For example, one faction would have developed the skill of riding motorcycles, and another would have developed pistol shooting. It is interesting that there are no motorcycles in the original GTA 3. Either the authors of the document did not take this into account, or such transport was implied for GTA Online, although in the end it appeared only in GTA Vice City. The character was conceived of 8 main parameters that the game takes into account. The first is strength, which determined how many things the player can carry without getting tired, and also determined the strength of the blow. The second is dexterity, affecting all skills that require manual dexterity, for sure. The third parameter is agility. This determined how much the player can run, how high he can jump, how he can dodge attacks, and even climb over obstacles. The latter sounds especially surprising, given that such a function was not only absent in GTA 3, but even in Vice City. The charisma parameter determined the player's ability to interact with NPCs. Yes, even regular characters were allowed in this multiplayer. The intelligence parameter calculated how well the player would cope with complex tasks, such as hacking a vehicle. Perception determined how well the character was able to notice various details that were not obvious to ordinary people. How this worked can only be guessed at. The item search system from Red Dead Redemption 2 comes to mind, but this is clearly not what the designers were thinking about in 2001. And the last 2 parameters are range attack and melee attack. Everything is pretty obvious here because the first is responsible for the ability to use firearms, and the second was responsible for close combat skills. As the character developed, he could learn new combat techniques, making more complex and painful blows both with his hands and feet. He could also choose to make a quick but weak blow or a longer but powerful one. The designers pay special attention to this point, and referred by the text of the document, it is quite obvious that this meant variability of animations and damage. Later, we saw a somewhat similar system in GTA San Andreas, where the main character can learn different fighting styles. By the way, the list of skills includes the item Swim, and this is again a reason to remember San Andreas, which was released 3 years later, in which the main character of GTA can swim for the first time. The following pages expand on this item and report that if a beginner with a basic swimming skill falls into the water, his character will lose energy and will not be able to move quickly. But if a more developed character ends up in the water, it will be easier for him to get out of the water. The skills also list languages, namely English, Italian, French, Japanese, Chinese, and Russian. And this is not at all related to the localization of the game for different regions of the world. This is a list of languages commonly used in criminal circles such as the Mafia, Yakuza, Triads, Russian gangsters, and so on. One of the activities could be the ability to issue counterfeit money, but the player could not start doing this until he improved a certain skill and learned to identify counterfeit money. During missions, criminals could pay off the police with cash bribes. It was even implied that it was possible to install listening devices for which a separate skill was used. But it is quite possible that this was just a game convention and not a working function for listening to players. And with the help of another special skill, various objects could be hidden in pockets or in larger things like a sofa. Such an ability as City Sense was conceived, which allowed the player to find the desired location using some kind of GPS, although this was supposed to be limited in time. The document also describes the chemistry parameter, thanks to which players could obtain formulas for creating prohibited substances or explosives. A separate skill was supposed to be the control of motorcycles and mopeds, which, as I already mentioned, were not in the original GTA 3. If the player does not have the medicine parameter, then in case of injury, he should go to the hospital or to another player with an increased medical skill. The possibility of gambling with NPCs and improving the corresponding character parameter was conceived. According to the description, this resembles the gambling establishment system later implemented in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Weapons could be improved, for example, install a silencer or something else. In reality, such a function appeared only in GTA 5. players could intimidate and interrogate NPCs in some missions. It was assumed that the user would be able to improve his transport and of course change its color to hide from enemies or the police. By the way, a full-fledged tuning option appeared only in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. It was even conceived of the possibility of using the surgery skill and making changes to the character's skin, for example, to change his face. The main goal is to allow the criminal to remain unidentified by the police and other players. This concept is amazing. It was possible to steal from other characters, taking money, weapons, or anything else. This could be done without the character knowing about it. One day in the game was supposed to be equal to 3 real hours. Part of the screen was supposed to be an interface area that displayed the wanted level in the style of 2D GTA games. Items that the character holds in his left and right hands, the character's body with his level of protection and injuries, and of course, there was a small area for chat. I can't say that all this looked convenient, but it is still interesting. By the way, regarding the chat, 2 methods were considered for its implementation: creating an application for exchanging messages or connecting third-party applications like ICQ, which were popular at the time. The designers described that the chat could be used even outside the server. The possibility of sending and receiving short voice messages between players was considered, and the character himself would move his lips during the playback of such a message. But the authors of the document were not sure about the success of this system, so they provided a backup option in the form of creating template phrases that players could easily publish in the chat. Some kind of pirate radio was conceived, which was described as an analog of the radio from the Warriors movie. It seems that on such a radio, players were supposed to receive various information, faction news, as well as music selected by the server owner. When approaching another character, the player could click on him and see a list of possible interactions, such as range attack, melee attack, talk, pickpocket, medical, and so on. Something similar can be found in RDR2. NPC police officers could identify the player and address him when they saw a crime, and when he started to run away, it would turn into a chase with the involvement of police players. It was planned to implement 2 lists of players. One of them would indicate all the current criminals. The designers write that this could become a source of pride among the bandits, and it would also make the police's job easier. And the other list would be a rating of law enforcement representatives, where their successes and failures would be indicated. But this would only be used within the police faction. The injury system could become quite advanced. For example, a character could not be killed by inflicting several injuries to his limb, but in this way, it would be possible to make the limb non-functional. If a leg was damaged, the character could limp, and if an arm was damaged, he could not use a weapon. An accurate hit to the head would knock the character off his feet, and he would fall to the ground, but would remain alive if the rest of the body was not yet damaged. In this case, the character had to be either finished off or, on the contrary, left alone and given the opportunity to escape. The inventory system stipulated that the player could not carry things with him without a logically justified way to store them. In other words, the number of things he had on him depended on clothes, bags, and backpacks in which the character could put items. Other things could be left in his safe house or even stored in the car. But the option with the car was risky because the vehicle could be destroyed or stolen by another player. An ambulance and the police could arrive at the scene of the incident where the player was injured. At such a moment, the injured player had a choice: to wait for the medics and get help, but then go to jail, or to hide and try to get treatment somewhere else but remain free. By the way, you had to pay for medical services. After the arrest, the player went to court. There, he could plead guilty and receive an average prison term, or he could try to justify himself, and then everything would depend on some legal skills. Several NPCs were supposed to preside in the court. In the event of the death of a member of the criminal faction, he would lose some of his reputation, money, and things. And if a policeman died, then, on the contrary, he would receive an increase in reputation because this was considered a heroic death in the line of duty, and the cops almost did not lose anything from their property and money. This difference between the police and the bandits was made for balance. The authors of the document assumed that the number of criminals would be several times greater than the representatives of the law, so the police needed encouragement. Special attention was paid to animations that would allow the character to better fit into the game world, as well as make any situation more authentic. The character could lean against the wall, light a cigarette, start looking around, etc. The player should have access to a mobile phone and a pager. One player could, figuratively speaking, call another, and then their communication would take place in a text chat. Also, the possibility of communicating only with those players who were nearby, as well as sending each other secret messages, as if the characters were whispering them, was conceived. Each player could buy an apartment on the territory of his faction in order to hide there, save, hide things, meet with other players. It was possible to invite a guest to your place if he approached the door from the outside. Here we can recall the system in San Andreas multiplayer on role-play servers, and even later in GTA Online. Also, the player wanted to be given the opportunity to have garages for storing and even modifying vehicles. On neutral territory, it was planned to locate townhouses, which would be luxury real estate with a correspondingly high price. It would be much more difficult for robbers to penetrate such a place than an ordinary apartment. In addition to the main location of the city, the document mentions completely separate zones not connected to the main map, but it is not entirely clear what they could be. Well, in order to leave the server after such an intense game, the player had to adhere to realism, so the game required going to the premises of his faction or to the place he rents. This could be an apartment, a mansion, or a warehouse. But it was forbidden to disappear from the server, for example, somewhere in the middle of the road. An alternative option was allowed, to find the nearest bench and sit on it. However, this was a risky method because disconnection from the server had to occur within 30 seconds, so being in such an open and unsafe place, the character could be attacked. To sum it up, the authors of this document had very ambitious plans. Sometimes you even wonder if these guys were familiar enough with the original GTA 3. Firstly, if they were to implement many of the things stated in the design document, Rockstar would need a version of the game engine at about the level of GTA San Andreas. And secondly, the whole concept described is not quite like the GTA we are used to. It is more like a serious simulator of the criminal world, where the player is required to play his role at a high level. And although there is something interesting and unique in this, it is still difficult to imagine that this would be suitable for the main GTA audience. As Abba Vermage, mentioned at the beginning of the video, commented on this document, Rockstar really did devote attention and some resources to the development of the online mode of GTA 3 at that time. However, it became obvious to them that this would require an incredibly long time, so they decided to abandon this idea. So, what happened in the end? More than 12 years after the creation of this document, a project with the same name and a similar logo appeared. It does not exactly repeat all the early ideas, but partially reflects the meaning of the early concept, transferring the famous GTA action to the online format, and at the same time does not require much effort from the player to play the role and develop the character. As a result, this project managed to become incredibly successful and attract the attention of millions of players around the world. What do you think about this? Would you play such an unusual GTA Online? Personally, I would try it, although I would hardly spend much time on it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave me a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more GTA content. See you soon.